Hey everyone, Mike Hughes here with Police Training HQ. And before we kick off today's episode with our usual intro, I wanted to set the stage for something a little different. I recently traveled down to Corpus Christi, Texas to attend the SafeWrap Instructor Course, and I can honestly say it was one of the most valuable hands-on training experiences I've had in years. If you're familiar with the Gracie Survival Tactics like I am, you'll recognize the same commitment to realism and officer safety in the SafeWrap system. But this training adds something uniquely effective and operationally simple. It's clean and an efficient way to safely control combative subjects, reduce risk, protect officers, agencies, and the people we serve. The course was hosted at the Corpus Christi Police Training Center, and I've got to give a huge thank you to Sam Mitchell with CCPD for being such an outstanding facility host. The training room was phenomenal, plenty of mat space, great layout, and a professional atmosphere all around. This particular course was coordinated and brought together by Chris Ellison from the Texas Department of Juvenile Justice, and it was taught by an incredible team of instructors: Charlie Fernandez, Bernardo Figueiredo, Diego Fernandez, and Karina Fernandez. Each one brought something valuable to the table, both technically and in how they connected with officers on the mat. At the end of day one, they were generous enough to sit down with me for a conversation about the SafeWrap system, how it fits into the current state of law enforcement training, and why realism and control matter now more than ever. As we roll our usual music, here's that special conversation from Corpus Christi with some of the best minds in modern police training.
This is the Police Training HQ podcast. We are your headquarters for all things training and resources for Texas law enforcement.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Police Training HQ podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hughes. We're in Corpus Christi, Texas, for a little training in the SafeWrap system from GST. Today we're diving into what might be one of the most important conversations in modern police training, and that's how to prepare officers to safely control combative subjects while protecting themselves, the public, and their departments from unnecessary risk. We'll be talking about the Gracie system, the SafeWrap method, why realism in training matters more than ever, and why jiu-jitsu might be the most important tool on an officer's belt. Joining me today are two men who've made it their life's missions to elevate law enforcement defensive tactics. And I'll start with you, Charlie. If you guys can kind of do a little bit of an introduction and a background, that would be great.
Yeah, Mike, honored to be here. My name is Charlie Fernandez. I am a retired Arlington police officer, Arlington, Texas Police Department. I have just shy of 30 years full-time service, and of that, 20 years was spent in police training. I've taught in-service. I became the defensive tactics coordinator, which that position oversees all the training for both the recruits and the in-service side, as well as the use of force training for the whole department. Some of my duties, in addition to curriculum development and training, were also use of force and reviewing use of force reports, testifying on behalf of the department in use of force issues, and related stuff like that. And then since I retired, I kind of transitioned to the reserve program, and just to stay a little bit active on that side of the house. But mainly my full-time work is now with Gracie University in the position of director of the Gracie Survival Tactics of it. So super excited, super stoked, great mission, because now we're doing work that affects officers all over the world, literally, and especially in the USA and Canada. And so super stoked to be here and share it with you.
Hey, my name is Bernardo. I am from Brazil. I moved to the U.S. in 2012. I used to be a professional swimmer, went to college here, and I put the same effort as I put into swimming into jiu-jitsu, and got my black belt, became very good, trained with some of the best people in the world, and was one of the fastest people to get a black belt from Henry Huron outside of Torrance. And I am a civilian. I just have a lot of passion for law enforcement, because I came from a place where we didn't have it readily available, right? So you call the police 30, 40 minutes later, that's when you get a response, right? So, and I saw what was happening here in the US, and I'm like, man, this is not good. There's a separation between law enforcement and the community that's unacceptable. And anytime that happens, we have worse recruits. We have less people wanting to become police officers. We have less command presence when we appear on scene. We have people being more emboldened when they speak to law enforcement. All these, and people more emboldened even to commit crime. So all these things, when I started seeing that trend in law enforcement and in society in the US in general, I'm like, man, there's no way I can let this turn into Brazil. There's enough jiu-jitsu competitors. There's not enough people that put their passion into jiu-jitsu training for law enforcement, so I'm gonna completely shift gears there, and that's what we do now. We're very, very focused on that. I love teaching the GSTs. I'm a master instructor for the GST program, but I'm just like, it is my absolute life mission to bring that relationship back, and I think that's the only way that we can get that done is through proper training and through making arrests not eventful, right? Like the last thing we want is to be all over TikTok, CNN, whatever it is, right? MSNBC, who knows, right? You want it to be so boring that people put their phones down. It's just not worth scrolling through, right? You will scroll through. That's the real mission there. So we're honored to be here, bro. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
I very much appreciate you guys being with me today. So just so we're kind of all on the same page with the audience, because we kind of have a broad audience, trainers and students alike. But so I was wondering if you could maybe explain the Gracie Survival Tactics and then kind of what makes it different from other defensive tactics programs or systems.
What a great question. Where do I start? So I'll probably say the first overarching thing that makes it different, it's built upon Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And Gracie Jiu-Jitsu comes from 100 years of field research and actually applying techniques on people that are fully resisting and controlling them in the most efficient way. And it was developed by someone who was very, very small and frail, who would have to fight giants, people, way bigger than him. And in order to do that, he found he could not, and this is Grandmaster Helio Gracie, him along with his brother Carlos Gracie, they found that they couldn't overpower these giants. There's no way that they can't just become stronger and more powerful to impose their will on these people that were like 200 pounds and plus, even bigger than that. So they had to use leverage. They had to use body positioning. They had to use all these other strategies and tactics to equalize the playing field. And this wasn't done over just a few years. This was done over decades and decades and decades. So this is the art that GST sprang from in the early 90s. In the wake of the Rodney King incident, Henry's dad, Jorion Gracie, was involved in that first group with the LAPD commission. And that sprang this GST. And of course, the UFC was also a major factor in getting interest from law enforcement. So GST's been here for approximately 30 years, going on 30 years. And it's this movement away from trying to be bigger and stronger than your opponent. Because look, when we hire officers, we don't hire 6'5" athletic people. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we hire much less athletic people of all sizes and shapes. And how do you train that person to go to a call with somebody way bigger and stronger than them? There is no weight classes for police officers. When you get the call, when that CAD system puts your unit number on the dispatch to go there, then you have to go and you have to prevail. So the main thing is enabling that smaller, weaker, average officer to do these things that normally would be reserved for these high-level athletes. And on top of that, so I would say to build upon that, what really makes it special also is that it is very humane in appearance. The officers have what we call volume control. They don't have to necessarily strike somebody into oblivion to accomplish the objective. They can use body positioning, leverage, all these other tools to get somebody in handcuffs. So I would say those are kind of the main things. We can go on more specific things later, but the main things that make it different.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of Charlie a little bit on this, right? Like, I think one of the things that, and I won't speak about other programs, but I'll speak up regarding consensus in policing, right? Which is the general idea is what? Let's, as quickly as possible, get this person in handcuffs, right? And let's be as, violence of action, it still has a place and time, and there's a lot of value there. But at the same time, we're like, man, maybe putting somebody in handcuffs in 10 seconds might be extremely difficult, somebody that's actually fighting. So the idea is, how can you control, exhaust, and then eventually get them into a place where they can be compliant, right? So we use that idea of dynamic de-escalation. How do we get somebody to eventually calm down so we can actually have a conversation and then move forward, right? A lot of our holds are they are mechanical holds. They're not based on pain compliance, right? So in order for pain compliance to be effective, it requires healthy pain sensors. So we don't rely, there's no pressure points, and even things that would then cause increase in pain, we're very cautious in applying those and very cautious in teaching those, because we understand that compliance is a window, not a destination. And we often associate the more force I put in, the faster I do it, the more likely they are to actually comply. And we found that not to be true, including when we survey officers, like, hey, if I were to try to punch you to have you stop, if I punch you in the face right now, would you fight harder or would you fight less? Most people that I know would fight much harder.
Yeah.
So, right? So how do we use a strategy on a subject that wouldn't work on us? And that, to me, that whole idea in general is faulty, right? So, and I think we bring a level of patience, a level of control, and a level of like Charlie said, like humanity to the table that is kind of unmatched. And we're like, yeah, we're even speaking about it today, right? The idea of like, yeah, I'm gonna, hey, let's get it in your stomach, hands behind your back, and let's handcuff you. But let's do that in 2 minutes, not now. Or maybe in 30 seconds or in 100 seconds, whatever it takes, right? So I think the idea of control, exhaustion, and then verbal de-escalation paired with dynamic de-escalation, which is the idea of using a physical hold to be able to then get somebody on a place where they're ready to comply.
Yeah, just to kind of circle back on this, because Bernardo brought up a good point about healthy pain receptors. We found that the two groups that pain compliance techniques don't seem to work on too well are the highly motivated and the highly intoxicated. By highly intoxicated, I mean drugs and or alcohol. Well, you asked the average street cop. I know when I was on patrol, probably, I don't even remember, maybe 80–90% of the people that resisted arrest were either drunk, intoxicated, and all of them were highly motivated. And that is not typically what you see in a police in-service group when you're teaching it, right? One of the jokes I always say is there is one cohort, one group that these pain compliant techniques work really well on. And that is an in-service student, an in-service officer who wants to get out at 3 o'clock so they can go home for the day because they're doing their time in service. We've all been there. We understand the mentality of what it's like to have to go through an 8-hour in-service day, and they don't want to make any fuss. They just want to do the techniques the instructor's telling them to do. So when their partner touches a pressure point, they tap out. They say, "Yeah, I feel it. Let's move on." They're not that motivated. So that is something super important, is to test things on motivated people. We can talk about our Santa Monica Beach thing a little bit later, but one of the things we do to motivate people, or we did in the past, was we did a little experiment where we put $1,000 in front of them. Get to that $1,000. That's how we can try to replicate the best we can. You can never fully replicate a street occurrence or a street situation, of course, but we try our best to do that. And one of the many things we've done is put money out in front of somebody and see if they can go get it. And it's amazing how all of a sudden the mindset changes when they think they're going to make. We did $10,000 one time in front of somebody. It's amazing what it does.
This was using SafeWrap?
This was doing a SafeWrap test. Yep, you put $10,000 in front of somebody, and if you can get that money, you can keep it. And now all of a sudden you don't have that in-service mentality. You have this person trying to die to get to that money because they're already thinking how they're going to spend it. So something super important on that pain compliance I just wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we could kind of shift a little bit, since you brought up SafeWrap, maybe you could tackle what it is and why it works, and how is it being adopted, or what's the plan for that to roll out to more agencies. As a user so far, I'm very impressed with the training and kind of just seeing it happen in real time. But maybe could you take a little time to walk us through what that program is?
Yeah, I'll do a little background and just kind of put it in context of how it fits into policing. So our actual healthcare system came to Gracie University and said, look, we need a system. We need a system to restrain patients. But we have some guidelines. We have some parameters. Here they are. You can't cause pain. No pain compliance. No joint locks. You can't have any type of vascular neck restraint or chokes. You can't put any pressure on their thoracic cavity. So, you can't impair their breathing, and you can't strike them. So we're thinking, this big long checklist.
Sounds like you can't touch them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, and even, jiu-jitsu, there's joint locks or, something like that. So the first thought is this doesn't exist. You obviously are not familiar with somebody really trying to resist you. But instead, Henner and the team took it to the laboratory and started working on it. And they came up with the first SafeWrap, the actual system of SafeWrap on how you can restrain somebody without fitting within all those parameters. Not striking them, not hurting them, no joint locks, no thoracic pressure to impair breathing, no vascular neck restraint. And it was pretty amazing. But the interesting thing where I like to focus on is, as a street cop for all those years, the first filter whenever something new comes along for me, does it work? The efficacy. Something first has to work. It can have all these other benefits, and those benefits are important. But if it has all the other benefits, but it doesn't work, then it's a moot issue. And I remember over the decades, they'll try to teach you something. And because it checks a lot of other boxes, which are great, but it doesn't work against a real suspect. And me being the guy having to knock on people's doors and work the domestics, make the arrest in the field, that would kind of it would upset me at the time, because I'm thinking, why are these people making these rules? They never, or if they have, they've forgotten what it was like to have to arrest a motivated person really trying to get away or trying to hurt me. So that's my filter, and that's just my own background coming from that. So the great thing about SafeWrap is, oh my God, that's probably the most efficacious, effective way to hold somebody and keep them from escaping. So I was super stoked about that. But yes, it does check all those other boxes. And it also, what's very unique about it is you don't have to put somebody prone. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not saying prone is bad. There are some situations where prone is actually recommended and advisable. So, when you're in police work, you have to be careful of always and nevers. There are definitely a place for prone on an officer's tool belt, no doubt. But I do remember over the years and even decades seeing situations where you would have somebody in some type of distress, medical and or mental distress, and I know various jurisdictions call it different things. So I'm not going to call it anything like excited delirium or anything like that, because there's a lot of debate in that community. So I'm just going to sidestep that. I'm just going to say there's some type of crisis the person's in that could be induced by various different things, such as drugs, mental health, or a combination thereof, okay? And you'll see situations like that where they're put prone. And they're put prone for a very short period of time. The officers, are doing what they're trained. They handcuff them. They put them on their side afterwards. They get medical attention, and the person still dies because of the other situation. Maybe the person has a heart attack. Maybe something happened with drug usage. Who knows? And I would see how the officer would get blamed for that, almost like the officer murdered somebody. And it really affected me. I mean, this officer's doing what they're trained. They're doing their job. The person tragically dies. The officer didn't want that to happen, and now they're going after the officer, criminally or civilly or administratively, or all three of those. And it's really tough. So the beauty about SafeWrap is when you can do it, in situations when you can do it, and you can put somebody in a SafeWrap, they never go prone. So if, let's say somebody has a heart attack unrelated to the police interaction, if they're in SafeWrap, it's very hard for somebody to come back and later say, well, you had them prone and you were positionally fixating them, right? Because you keep them in that side position. So super advantageous for the officer, super advantageous for the agency, and on that front. So those things are so important to look at, because I mean, look, this ruins an officer's life. Even if the officer survives it and doesn't get convicted, it is a very, very critical time for an officer to go through a civil suit or criminal prosecution. So I was very, very excited about that. By using this as a default method, you don't have to put them prone. And I'll let Bernardo go into some more details on that, because I could talk about SafeWrap forever.
Well, I wanted to ask, so we do instructor development, and one of the things we always preach is in a class. It's have autonomy, relevance, and practical application. And the way you started the class today, because it's like instantly it's relevance and practical application, because the guy you picked, I think his biceps were about as big around as my waist, and I got a rather large waist. And I think it's like an instant sales pitch of this works. And anybody that's a naysayer, just lay down and try it out. It's like let's pressure test this, and it's like that instantly people are going, man, that's the biggest dude in the class, and it's working on him. But so again, sorry, just if you would follow up a little bit on that.
Of course, yeah. No, like right, we love to one, we want to feel what people are currently doing. So we have that advantage, right, that we get to test, right? And the beauty about the mats is that the mats never lie. The mats will tell the truth, whether the thing works or not, right? And those two people work together. They have been working together for a while, from what I could tell, right? And they're well trained. They're doing exactly what they're told to do, but they have a mentality that is, you know, hey, let's, as fast as possible, let's get this person hands behind their back. Let's put them prone. Let's get their hands behind their back. And if you have somebody that's very motivated or is willing to just get up, it's not like I was doing any black belt jiu-jitsu magic, right? All I was doing is just holding my hands and getting up to my feet. So, like, it's, which is not uncommon because I've seen enough footage now of people just turning, right? And I'm like, man, this is very interesting that, and then I even, including asking the students, right? Like, hey, the things that you teach, can they do that to you? If the students can't pull it off on you, either there's a massive skill gap, right? Which is perfectly fine, right? And acceptable, because most people they're gonna be arrested are not gonna be trained anyways. But the reality is, if they can't do it to you, maybe the whole needs a little bit of love, needs a little bit of work, right? So the whole idea of like, okay, let's, you know, first thing, I'm gonna find the two biggest people in the class, provided they work together and they can actually do some form of tandem application, and let's see how well that works, right? So we had two huge guys on top of me. They're just trying to get my hands behind my back, and I'm like, I preface it was like, hey man, I'm a big kid going through a mental crisis. I just punched my mom. Please don't punch me in the face, but I just don't want to go to jail. I'm not even fighting them. I'm just not wanting to get arrested. Which is really funny, right? Because like too often we think every single fight is a fight for your life that you're gonna be like, right? And it gets treated as such. But the reality is there's a lot of gray in between, right? So we were attempting to find something that I would feel comfortable enough, you know, doing to my grandma, to one of my nephews, or somebody that would be much smaller. And I would also feel comfortable doing to, you know, ADCC silver medalists, right? Like on ultra heavyweight. So like the fact that it happened to be the most humane hold that I know, and also the most effective, is really crazy. And we make it look so effortless, right? We held the guy down. We didn't take that much. And finally, he just quit. He was like, okay, I'm done. I'm like, oh, great. Bro, these are like, talk about the magic words in policing. I'm done. As in like, and from a place of like, I didn't fight him. I just fought his will to fight, right? He was so depleted as a function of he himself attempting to escape. Not even that we were putting like any pressure on their chest. We weren't doing any joint locks. He was just, man, I've been through enough loops of attempting to escape and not going anywhere. And there's so much like hope was lost to an extent that the person they just feel defeated. They cannot get out. So that's the intent there, right? So on top of that, how little energy we're using to hold that person down, which also is very interesting and very unique as a feature of the system. But SafeWrap, right? Like I'm a co-founder of SafeWrap, and it was very interesting because it's the only thing that me, Henry, and Hiron can do to each other when you cannot escape each other. I'm like, oh, that's very telling, right? Like if we all mount each other, or we all like side mount each other, we all get each other in guard, we can all escape, we can all do things to each other. When we get each other in SafeWrap, it's game over. We cannot escape. And that is really telling, to put it mildly, right? So it just founded in too many, like there's too many good ideas, right? We're like, okay, maybe the answer is not to put the person prone as like, not saying that is a bad answer. I'm saying that, what if we can just keep them on their back long enough until they exhaust it, and then we can, instead of putting them all the way prone to get their hands behind their back, which is arguably one of the biggest, one of the main advantages of prone is that you have exposure of the lumbar, and that allows you to extract the hands, right? The other advantage is that it makes it to where they can't hit you, right? So like, okay, what if you can hold them in a way where they're supine, which is a better way to keep people pinned and controlled, but at the same time, we lose the tactical advantage of them being able to strike you. And if you get them lateral, now we have the advantage of them not being able to hit you. You can still expose the back, and now they still can't build the house. So you have all the advantages of prone and all the advantages of supine combined into one hold, which is what makes SafeWrap so amazing. And that's why we loved it.
Good.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on, Bernardo kind of reminded me when he was talking about that, it reminded me of one of the biggest fallacies in police use of force, which is, let me frame this by saying there's a logical paradigm, and here's the paradigm. I have a high degree of safety once I get them in handcuffs. So I don't want to say 100% safe because, yes, we all know people handcuffed can do some bad things. But in general, you have a very high reasonable degree of safety when they're in handcuffs. Therefore, the quicker I get them in handcuffs, the quicker I'm safe. That's very logical. I mean, very, very logical. The only problem, the only missing caveat is that you need to be able to say, how can I get them to handcuffing and not lose control? Because if I rush to handcuffing, I can lose control between now and the destination, which is handcuffing. So I'll give you an example. When I was defensive tactics coordinator at the PD, we kind of intuitively knew that there was a little bit of a weakness, a tactical weakness of prone, where we would call build a house, where they kind of make a turtle and they kind of stand up under power. I would see it in uses of force where you have 4 or 5 guys holding one person down of average size and 2 or 3 or 4, jailers or officers that were big. And it looked like magic the way the small guy could somehow explode up to their feet and run off, or explode up to the feet and keep fighting. And because they have all the strongest muscles in the body that they're using when they're in that turtle position, that push-up position, that house building position, we kind of intuitively knew that, but we didn't know how to address it adequately because we didn't have SafeWrap. So what we would do is we'd exhaust them as much as we could, supine, and then we would have to very cautiously turn them prone and then handcuff them. So you can see it's almost like you're whistling past a graveyard, and that once you turn 90 degrees, you're hoping they don't explode, because sometimes what they would do is once their body turned 90 degrees and beyond, the best way to describe it is explode to turtle and build a house very quick, almost like a wrestler. You see an NCAA wrestler get up from the refereeing position quick and hard, like that. We found that sometimes with a lot of training, we could control it, but it took a huge amount of training, and it still wasn't that reliable. SafeWrap came along, and it's like, wow, we don't have to even go past that exposure point. We could just keep them 90 and before 90 degrees, so we don't even give them the opportunity to escape. And we can train in such a smaller fraction of time than we would when we were doing it the other way, when we have to get so good at prone control, we would have to, it would take many, many, many more hours. And which brings up another thing. When we would do prone and we were training it, it had to be perfect. It had to be very, very good. If the officer forgot 15% of it, 20% of it, the person's escaping. They're out, right? So one of the filters that we put when you're analyzing a new tactic system is, what if the officer forgets 90% of it? Will it still work? So that's such a huge filter, right? What if the officer forgets 90% of it? In SafeWrap, they can forget 90% of it, and they're not getting out. They just have to remember about 10% of it, and it's going to work for them. Versus what we used to do, and I see a lot of other agencies doing different things, is if they forget 10% of it, 15% of it, the person's gone. So that's a huge officer safety concern right there.
Yeah, like the function of forgiveness on the student end, right? As if we could train everybody like every single day, and we could spend even if we did like 2 times or 3 times a week, and we could do that for a year or 2, what are we talking about? Then we can do pretty much anything we want, right? There's such skill discrepancy between the officer and the subject that you see the same thing as like a blue belt or a purple belt against a clean white belt, somebody that just comes through the door. They can handle them relatively easily, right? Even with one person. But we don't have that luxury. We only have 4 hours every 2 years, 4 hours a year. If you're really, really lucky at your agency, you have 8 hours, It's like, they get 8 hours. Yeah, they get 2 4-hour blocks. And if you pick any other sport, if you pick running, if you pick track, if you pick swimming, if you pick cycling, if you cycle for 4 hours once a year, you're not a cyclist. You just cycled once. See what I'm saying? So the problem is that we are teaching something that the required level of skill will be something that they would have to practice relatively frequently to stay sharp and to continue building that skill. And if they were to forget something, there's no forgiveness on the system. But SafeWrap, if they forget everything, one goes high, one goes low, we keep them on their back forever until they get tired. And then you can figure out how to get them in handcuffs. But to have that level of scrutiny, if you flip that and you do the same thing with prone, you can still go, one goes high, one goes low, but then you turn them on their stomach, what happens? then you forget how to hold them. They get up and they get away, right? It's also fascinating that we have an entire sport dedicated to how to get somebody from standing to the ground and hold them there for as long as possible. It's called wrestling, right? Literally, the two people start standing. The only objective is to put the person on their back and hold them for a few seconds. Why is that? Why is the back, why is the pin considered both shoulder blades on the ground? And yet we're talking about, as a function of control, putting people on their stomach, which is often referred to as like referee's position, or like when they turn out, it's extremely difficult to keep that person pinned. Why? Because they can always build up, and even including it being considered a relatively neutral position when you start in that referee's position. So how is it possible that, you know, we're attempting to hold somebody in arguably one of the hardest ways to hold somebody, which is when they're on all fours, right? Or when they try to prone them out. And at the same time, we like have this understanding for like 3,000 years, 4,000 years since wrestling has been around, right? Well, are you potentially longer? But that, if you put somebody on their back and you hold them there for a little bit, they're not getting up anymore. So it's funny that it's almost like a forgotten skill, a forgotten piece of knowledge. But you talk to any jiu-jitsu person, they'll be like, hey, which one would you rather hold, side mount or turtle? They'll say side mount every single day of the week. And yet, as soon as we get the person down, we're like, get him on his stomach now. And then boom, they build the house, and that becomes problematic, right?
So can I zoom us out for a minute? I had a note here. So why does jiu-jitsu make better officers? And I would say, first, do you believe that? Mm-hmm. And I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But what do you think is the why behind that? Because we are seeing more officers train, but I don't know consistently. And I think about, I go to jiu-jitsu and I see officers come for a couple of weeks, and then some little teeny bopper embarrasses them and they won't come back ever again. I don't know how to, is there a fix for that? Or, and I know it's kind of multiple questions rolled into one, but just interested in kind of what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, besides the obvious tactical reasons, you know, manipulating a human body, controlling a human body, I'll just kind of go into a little bit of a more broad perspective on this. It builds resiliency in the officers. You learn, if you're on the bottom of somebody's mount, and for those who haven't done jiu-jitsu, when you're tired and somebody's kind of sitting on your torso, kind of so to speak, in mount, it can induce panic in some people. I mean, it's a very, very hopeless feeling. And for somebody to learn that they can survive that and operate in that environment and prevail is very, very important. It has this kind of bleed over effect in other aspects of their life. They become more resilient to setbacks. So when I'm on a call and something goes wrong on the call, I'm not as likely to go to pieces. I'm going to be more resilient on that. So that is huge. Also, I'll even say on a neuroscience basis, having the prefrontal cortex, part of your brain, engaged, and just as a very brief overview on that, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for if-then reasoning, communication, hearing, understanding, task switching from one task to the other, adapting to different setbacks. There's a whole litany, even morals. They've done studies where when the prefrontal cortex is impaired, somebody's morals and ethics change. So, which is really interesting when you think about that, right? That neuroscience basis behind it. So the prefrontal cortex is very, very important for officers adhering to the law, adhering to their agency's policies, prevailing tactically, kind of understanding the chess pieces of what they're dealing with and being able to come up with the right solution. Here's the problem, though. The prefrontal cortex is extremely sensitive to acute stress. So we as humans are designed, once we get a little bit of acute stress, the prefrontal cortex tends to go offline, and another part of the brain called the amygdala becomes dominant. And just think of the amygdala as anger and fear themed, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawning, all these different behaviors that are not conducive to a police officer, that the public does not expect out of a professional police officer, become kind of the dominant behaviors. So the problem is the prefrontal cortex does all these great things, but acute stress, now the amygdala takes over and it does all these things we want to avoid. And here, the problem is acute stress, officers swim in a sea of acute stress. That's all they deal with is acute stress when they, get a call on the streets. So what's interesting is the literature actually had the answer, and that is perception of control. So, and this is even true in animal models, by the way. If a human or an animal has a perception of control, like they can control their situation, they're in control, then on a neurochemical basis, their prefrontal cortex stays engaged. As soon as they feel like they've lost control, they're not in control of their situation, they become panicked and the amygdala takes over. It's an amygdala hijack, if you will. So jiu-jitsu teaches an officer control. Even if I'm on the bottom of a mount, I know how to keep somebody from hurting me and punching me because jiu-jitsu taught me how to do that. If I'm on the bottom of guard, so I have somebody in my guard, I can avoid their punches, I can avoid their strikes, I can retain my weapon. If I'm on the bottom of side mount, et cetera, that gives me a perception of control. So when I do wind up in a bad situation, it's not bad enough to where I have the amygdala hijack. So I would say that's the overarching neuroscience theme by why jiu-jitsu makes better officers, because we want prefrontal cortex officers, not amygdala-driven officers. And I'll let Bernardo weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting how jiu-jitsu has this capacity to make bad positions not feel as bad, right? Because you have a plan. And I'm a big believer that peace is a function of choices and options. So anytime you have no options, it's very tough to remain calm, right? And same as if you have too many options, you feel like you have that paradox of choice, right? So what happens is, because jiu-jitsu gives you like bad situations are only bad if you don't have an answer to get out of them. So, right? Like if you're in the bottom of the mountain, you don't have an answer, you're gonna have a hard time. And if you have one answer, it might be tough. And if you have two answers, it might be tough. But if you have and you see this with inexperienced jiu-jitsu instructors, and even piggybacking off the thing that you're saying, that people will train a few times and they'll start quitting. I find that to be true, particularly one, on the level of instruction, but two, because people get introduced to certain levels of resistance too early, at least in my opinion. But I find it fascinating how instructors will say things like, oh, you need to calm down. And they'd be like, oh, never thought about that ever. Great suggestion. You know what I'm saying? Like the person's freaking out. They know one scape, they just tried that one scape and that failed. You better freak out. What's a better answer than freaking out? You don't have anything else. You see that? So yeah, go ahead and freak out. But when you see black belts sparring, what does it look like? It looks like a little dance. It looks like they're not trying that hard, right? And then you have very common in jiu-jitsu schools. You have like a 50-year-old dad that will have like a six-pack after training, smoking cigarettes right before, and then he walk in there and he'll smoke a 20-year-old, right? Like not even close. So it's really fascinating that they have that kind of cool, that kind of they're just kind of collected and they have it going on. Why? Because the visual that I usually get is my house is on fire. I just saw fire in the kitchen, and I have my front door. If you only have that front door and you try to open it and it's locked, like completely shut, what do you need to do? You better kick that door. Yeah. That's what you're gonna do. But if you have 17 keys and 25 doors to open, and you start the fires in the kitchen and you're gonna start walking out, what do? You're like, oh great. You just start turning one key, turn the other key, turn the other key, turn the other key, and then eventually that one opened, great, and you just walk out the house. Which is what you see black belts and people that've been more experienced going through these cycles in their head. The piece that they perceive, it comes from the range of options that they have. And too often, because beginners get introduced to sparring so early, they don't have even the recall capacity or the reflexes to be able to then perform under resistance. So then they introduce resistance too early, that becomes problematic. That's when people get frustrated, and that frustration is the very reason why people start to leave. So a couple things on that, right? Like one, people start sparring too early in jiu-jitsu. I think they should hold off a little bit longer. But seconding to that is their thinking around their training. And too often I see that police officers, particularly happens with police officers, but this is true for general population, is that we are very good at getting ourselves to take action through shame, guilt, pressure, fear, right? So we will, you do a technique slightly wrong, the second time you ever do it, you're like, oh man, I didn't get that right. And the way that you're treating yourself throughout that process, by the time you realize how much more is there to learn, that thought that you're gonna have to treat yourself for that much longer in order for you to get a black belt or a brown belt or whatever you're looking for, that thought weighs so heavy in your head, and you would have to be so harsh on yourself for so long, you then quit. You come up with anything else to quit. But the underpinning is that very idea that you cannot get yourself to take action, and when you do get yourself to take action, you're taking action through a fuel that burns dirty. Right? So how can you get officers and how to get people in general to have a better lens, right? To have a better filter through which they then get themselves to train? And how can we then remove that idea that hey, look, you're not ready for resistance yet. Maybe you need more reflexes. Maybe you need better reactions. Maybe you need better recall prior to you introducing a really, really high level of resistance. Or maybe we need to introduce some degree of restraint on the training prior to them attempting to go full on, right? So we get really, really good results from these. And by the end of day 2, people are already going really, really hard. People can resist a lot, and you already have good reflexes, good recall. Then you can introduce some degree of resistance. But because they get introduced, usually day 1, day 2, they're already sparring. And what do they know? They learn 3 techniques ever. And then the rest is whatever they're making up. So they're making up stuff. The stuff they're making up evidently is not going to work, because the people that are there all felt the stuff that they are trying, because reactions from people that don't train are very predictable. They're not that complicated. They push, they roll, they turn, they try to grab your head, and they try to punch you. Those are the things that normal people do. It's never that fancy. So they're so accustomed and so callous to that. Then they try all those things, they get really frustrated, and they're like, oh man, I knew jiu-jitsu wasn't for me. And then they quit. So I think introduction of resistance levels later, even without recall or reflexes, is faulty thinking. And the second thing is, how can we make it to where people can be a little bit kinder to themselves while they're training, and as they're going through the process of going from not knowing to knowing, right? I find it fascinating that somebody would do a technique twice and be like, okay, let me see if it really works. I'm like, bro, that's crazy. Imagine if you were a boxer, like put a boxing lens on, right? Imagine a boxer, you jab twice the air and you're like, okay, let's go to spar. That's a crazy idea. Nobody will ever do 2 jabs and think, oh, I'm a boxer. And yet you're doing something that's significantly more complicated in jiu-jitsu. Like maybe you're doing a triangle or anything, right? Like think of a slightly more, maybe a guard pass that has 6, 7, 8 steps. You did it twice and now you're gonna try to pull it off in sparring? That is insanity, right? The fact that you haven't done it enough, right? You have no recall, you have no reflexes, and now you're trying to do an immense amount of resistance, to me is extremely faulty, and why so many people quit so early, because they just realize maybe it's not for them.
Well, think they can order it on Amazon and it'll be there the next day.
Yeah, there you go.
For sure, yeah.
I just want to piggyback one thing on what Bernardo said about that what he's talking about with overwhelming. There was a study I remember where it basically said if you overwhelm somebody, you know, like if somebody's afraid of something and you just give them too much of it or they can't handle it, it actually strengthens the fear pathways. It actually strengthens those pathways to get their amygdala hijacked. I remember one time years ago, this supervisor, it wasn't even DT training, but he was so proud of it. He said, we had this female officer that was afraid of getting hit in the nose. So this is how we fix it. So he shows us a video of 2 big guys dressed in the red man suit beating her up and hitting her in the nose over and over again. And he was so proud of that. And we were all looking at each other like, you just confirmed her fear. You taught her to be more afraid of that. It's logical. It makes sense. So often you see in a jiu-jitsu world, you see in the police world, they overwhelm the person and they're thinking that that's going to get them there. It has the opposite effect. It makes them more afraid or sets them back further.
Yeah, totally agree. Like if anything, that's like reinforcing the trauma, right? Imagine a trauma victim, instead of like attempting to reframe what they experience to turn it into potentially something positive, which is often a lot of the work that's done in therapy. Imagine you just putting them in that same situation again. That's what you're doing. That is insanity, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that. Like it's always easy when you pick the edge. Imagine if you had an assault victim, like a sexual assault victim, and the way that you tried to them to be able to be functioning in society again is you put them in that same situation. Think how crazy that is. We don't do that. What do? We teach assault prevention strategies.
Right.
It's the same thing. If you're afraid of getting hit in the nose, sure, you might want to know what getting hit in the nose feels like, so you can at least experience it one time, what that feeling is. But past that, your entire training is devoted to not get hit in the face. Nobody gets better at getting hit in the face, by the way. That's not how that works. You get mildly callous, but like past that, you do not get better at getting hit in the face. That's not true. You just get better at dodging, you get better at blocking, you get better at parrying. And that's what you do with anybody, right? Like for law enforcement, right? You don't go like, okay, let me get hit in the face 150 times. So now when they hit me in the face, the 151, I'm not going to feel it as much, right? Like, that's crazy. That's not how stress inoculation works. Not for those kind of scenarios, right? Stress inoculation works when something, as getting exposed to the stressor, only works when the stressor is not actual damaging. For example, a spider that's on the wall and is not killing you, you should maybe spend more time with that spider. You see that? And how do you start? With a piece of paper far away from you, right? And then you actually have finally the real thing. And then you realize that a spider far away from you is not a real threat. But for actual real threats, the way that you address it in order for the person to be more calm is you prevent it. That's what we're doing. So to think that case is crazy, bro.
Stress inoculation, you hear that word a lot. But let's take a step back. What's inoculation? So I want to inoculate you to, I don't know, measles. And I'm not a virologist, so don't quote me on the exact methodology. Wouldn't you get a weakened or a dead measles virus injected in you? What that other instructor was doing was akin to getting the full-blown measles, 100% potency, and injecting it in you over and over again to try to get you to prevent the measles. That's nuts. So inoculation's a weakened form to get you used to the real thing later.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great way to put it, bro. I really like that.
Well, this is exciting stuff, and I don't want to keep you guys forever. If you wouldn't mind, just so our listeners have a path to find out more, GST and SafeWrap, what's sort of the best way to find out more about those programs or systems?
Yeah, so you can learn about, go to gracieuniversity.com/GST, or just go to gracieuniversity.com and click on law enforcement. You'll find it. You can read all about the system there. It's a very, very detailed website there. You can even get an executive summary of some stuff. We have that coming in the pipeline very soon. You could also go to SafeWrapSystem.com, and you could click on all of that. It's going to be very, very detailed. A lot of videos, executive summary, everything you need. You could also reach out to us at GST Support at GracieUniversity.com. So it's G as in George, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, support at GracieUniversity.com, and we can help you get registered for a course. If you're interested in hosting a course, reach out to us. We'd be interested in talking with you because you can earn some free slots and get some free training for hosting a course. So it's very exciting. Talk to us. We can answer any questions that you have, and we'll be happy to connect.
Outstanding. Well, thanks again for coming on and chatting with me here for a bit. And for our folks, you can find us at PoliceTrainingHQ.com. So everybody stay safe out there, and we'll see you on the next podcast.